I would like to hand this off to Lawrence Williams with the MSCC. Lawrence, take it away.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I want to start off by saying it warms my heart to see members from Virginia State. I had graduated from Petersburg when I came from Germany. I'm not going to date myself, but I learned to play basketball in the US on Virginia State's campus. So, you know, it's always a special place to me. So welcome, you know, my friends from Virginia State. And I also wanted to say thank you to, you know, our partners from OSG for taking the time to present with us today. That's very important, and I appreciate the time. And also, we have a member from NTIA, and I'm very excited about that because I understand all the work that NTIA is doing, and I'm looking forward to the MSCC partnering with NTIA on as many initiatives as we can. So welcome everyone. And with that, you know, wanted to do a quick overview of the agenda. One second, I lost my screen. Too many windows open. So today we're going to have a presentation with OSG, and afterwards, myself and Emily, we're going to go over some updates. I do want to let everyone know that Anna will not be on the call due to a meeting conflict, but we will keep her informed of everything that's moving forward. For our new members of the MSCC, please help us get the word out. I would also like to set up a meeting with you, maybe a quick 30-minute meeting, just to see how the MSCC can help and kind of level set some expectations. So, you know, look for an email from me, you know, a 30-minute call to figure out how we can partner and how we can, you know, expand the connection and the benefits from the MSCC. So today's meeting is about 60 minutes. Hopefully we won't go over, hopefully we'll be able to give a little bit of time back, but I'm really excited that everyone's here. And with that, let's get started with our friends from OSG.
Okay, so Lawrence, I missed how much time you're giving me because just give me, because I basically will adjust accordingly. I wasn't 100% sure. Can you just give me a sense of how much time I have?
Yeah, you have 30 minutes. Is that enough
okay.
time?
Oh, more than enough. I was hoping to stick. I will try to stick well below that in my presentation, and then we go to Q&A. I think I have 16 slides and then backup material. So let me figure out if I can actually go full screen. One moment, and there is this one here, the new share, and good. PowerPoint, and full screen. You should see me now full screen, is that correct?
Yes.
And it moves back and forth if I toggle?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I wanted to give an introduction to OSG, and what I wanted to start to give you the slides that I'm presenting here are almost verbatim from collected from presentations I gave at the annual all hands meeting just a couple of weeks ago. We have an annual event for the consortium, and this annual event, it functions both to show off ourselves and to receive input from the community, and where ourselves really means the entire consortium. And what do I mean by this? OSG is a consortium dedicated to the advancement of all of open science via the practice of distributed high throughput computing and the advancement of the state of art of distributed at high throughput computing. And so that you can think of this as statement of purpose or the mission statement. The consortium is the largest possible umbrella we can think of that you can fold over the community of stakeholders. Then what is that community of stakeholders? We think of it as 4 types of participants, very, very broadly defined. There is the individual researchers and small groups that we serve through what we call the open science pool. There is campus research support organizations where for the individual researchers, we appear just like a campus research support organization. We basically provide the kind of services that a campus research support organization would provide to their campus researchers, and we provide it to people who don't have that support across the nation, or who would rather work with us than their campus IT people. At the same time, given that that doesn't scale to the nation easily, we are working actively with campus research support organizations in order to, you can think of it as training the trainer to achieve scalability. We work with them on a variety of ways that they can then broaden the impact of OSG and become a multiplier. Then we found that these two types of entities doesn't really serve the needs of all, because there's one other entity, and that is multi-institutional science teams. So if you think of it, campus research support organization is one organization that serves multiple disciplines. Science teams tend to be in a single discipline, but multi-institutional. So in a way, these two types of stakeholders are literally orthogonal to each other, but they are both multi in a funny way. And then the fourth, and then we found it useful to have the billion-dollar science projects, the really big science, split out from the mid-scale kind of multi-institutional science teams, because the big science have, through their size, such a different set of requirements and needs that lumping these two types into the same category serves neither. And so we ended up with 4 types of entities that we think about. And I'm assuming that when I'm talking to you guys here, I'm talking to, you're covering the first 2 entities, meaning and there's people at your institutions that we could be serving as individuals, and there is your institutions themselves that we could be serving as research support organizations. And so this is sort of where I assume that you fit in. Now, let's talk strategy. The strategy of OSG from day one was that we're a collaboration between IT infrastructure people, software people, and science professionals. And these are, again, sort of 3 very broad categories. We're trying to bring, as a consortium, we're bringing these 3 types of people together in order to get science done, basically. As a result, OSG appears very differently to different people. Some people use us primarily as trainers, others as service providers, some as compute and data infrastructure, and then there is a scientific user community that we enable. So it's a broad. We struggled over the years of defining exactly what exactly is OSG, and then we just gave up and said, look, it's like an elephant, and you're seeing only a small piece of it. Sometimes you see the tail, sometimes you see the front, sometimes you see the leg, and it just shows up differently depending on who looks and who the person is that we're dealing with. And second, the consortium is governed by a council. Given that the consortium is really the biggest possible structure we can think of, there is a council that governs it. It maintains its bylaws, and it elects an executive director for 2-year renewable terms. And that executive director is then responsible for coordinating the program of work. And that program of work comes from effort out of multiple funded projects. And so we have in order to get stuff done, we have an annual mechanism where we say, okay, fine, what are the priorities for next year? Which projects are willing to pay for it by providing the effort? And then voila, off we go. And then we have in a way have a matrix structure where OSG has a structure as to get stuff done on a day-by-day basis, and then the programs that the projects contribute that are actually funded have structures, and they mesh into each other, so that we end up receiving effort from more than one project at a time. And I look at this all as being an ecosystem of effort, an ecosystem of a community that ultimately is guided by the council to achieve the strategy, using a strategy to achieve a mission. Now, I thought that it's sort of amusing to show when things started. This is a picture from our founding ceremony. The consortium was founded officially in 2005. In fact, on July 20th in 2005, at the all hands meeting at the time, if I remember correctly, we had a ribbon cutting ceremony, and this is the picture of the ribbon cutting ceremony. And as you can see, I was the founding executive. I was the executive director during the founding time when we put the bylaws in place, and then stepped aside in 2000 towards, I can't remember, it must have been late 2005, early 2006, and in order to do science only and focus more on my science. And then I came back in 2015. I've now been the executive director since 2015. And the fact that there is a DOE representative and 2 NSF representatives tells you that originally, when it was founded, it received attention from both the DOE and the NSF, and also was the first 10 years it was funded by the DOE and the NSF in some sort of joint way. Right now, almost all of our funding comes from the NSF. Now, let's talk a little bit away from the past and the present and towards the future. What do we want to accomplish? What's our vision? What's our aspiration? The long-term vision and aspiration is to create an open national cyber infrastructure that allows the Federation of CI cyber infrastructure on all 4,000 accredited degree-granting higher education institutions, non-profit research institutions, and national laboratories. Basically, anything and anybody organizationally, any institution that has something to do with open science, open data, and should have the means to, the open infrastructure they were building should be open to all of them. And I look at the open infrastructure as a necessary extension to the other 3 open things that everybody knows about. We all have some kind of intuitive sense of what open science means, what open data means, and what open source means. And I'm trying to explain to people these days, what do I mean by open infrastructure? Where open infrastructure includes compute, storage, access, data access. CDN stands for Content Delivery Network. So not only do you want data on storage, you also want to be able to access that data. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And accessing it transparently and from anywhere requires some kind of content delivery network. And today we don't do this much, but in the future, I could imagine that the open infrastructure would also be open for devices, instruments, IoT, and anything else you can think of that smells like hardware. So in a way, we're aspiring to create an open infrastructure that spans all of this across all of the institutions that are engaged in all of that. And so we're creating openness for an open society. Now, openness for me in its own right then asks what for, and that gets me to the next point. And that probably speaks to your organization more than anything else I'm talking about today. And that I've stolen this from the Minds We Need, which, as best as I can tell, is a bottoms-up organization. And I'm stealing from there primarily because I find this the articulation of the way I look at it, and nobody else that I've seen has articulated what I think we're trying to accomplish in as little words, as concisely, and as well. And you can, of course, the top one, I've already talked about. The bottom one, my summary of the bottom paragraph is, given that we don't know where the next generation genii, or whatever the plural of genius is, come from, it behooves ourselves to make sure that the opportunity gap gets diminished. I used to, years ago, I used to think of this as a geek gap, a gap of geekiness and knowledge in technology, but I've actually changed my mind on this over the last few years. And today I see this primarily as a social gap. A a gap where our society has failed to make social connections and provide access for all kinds of weird, strange social reasons. And I'd like to work with you guys on filling in that gap as much as we can. And that's basically why I'm here. Then let me give you a little bit of a sense of what the state of the art. Obviously, 4,000 institutions is an awfully large stretch. And obviously, scaling out that far is an enormous undertaking. And so I wanted to give you a sense of where we're at today. What's the state of the art? This is, of course, a world map, and all the green dots are organizations that are currently registered with some kind of infrastructure with the OSG. In most places, it's multiple compute clusters. For example, UCSD is one green dot here. And at UCSD, actually, sorry, I take this back. UCSD is two green dots here. One green dot is the San Diego Supercomputer Center, and the other green dot is the physics department. And so the physics department has resources that it shares on OSG and the San Diego Supercomputer Center. But when we count institutions, we count the 64 institutions, we count both of these green dots as one. And let me talk a little bit about who those places are. Trying to, within the last year or so, we've shifted from counting resources as in compute cycles and terabytes and that sort of thing, and put a stronger focus on understanding who are we reaching? What are the institutions that we're reaching? And how can we figure out to reach more of these institutions? Basically, within the last year, if you had talked to me a year and a half ago, you would have seen a very different vision. You wouldn't have seen this kind of aspiration. So this aspiration for OSG is relatively new, maybe 2 years max. And this kind of expression and rationalization is also relatively new, maybe a year and a half max, maybe even, I don't remember exactly when I started talking about this as the primary motivation, but it's in the neighborhood of a year or 2 years. And so, and for this year's all hands meeting, is the first time that we've actually looked and assessed what are the counts. And so going forward, this is how we want to count part of our impact. And so we are counting institutions, and we're counting then, we're then asking ourselves, given that we have an actual explicit list of all the institutions that we're counting, we're asking ourselves, are they minority serving institutions? Are they in EBSCO states? Are they non-R1s? Are there none of the above? And then we keep track and are trying to, by growing the 64 to, well, 640, say, over the next few years, if we can scale out by another order of magnitude, what happens to these numbers?
Turn right
and are we achieving democratization of access by increasing this number? Does the ratio, what happens? And I'm very much interested in working with you, and I'm basically appealing to your help in increasing this number and increasing this number, increasing this number and that number, right? And so, and by increasing these numbers, achieving the democratization that we're really after. And I promised Anna and Lawrence that I will share with you the actual institutions that make up this, the 64 and how do we count, so that you can help me confirm that our counting makes sense. So the way that I've counted for this is I Googled, Google as usual is your friend, and I found a PDF that listed all of the MSI, the EBSCO states was easy. The non-R1 is tricky. I'm not 100% sure that we got that right. And so this is sort of how I arrived at the counting. And next, I wanted to mention briefly the OSG Data Federation. In order to be able to not just compute, but also provide data, we have two concepts. We have the concept of a data origin, A data origin is basically a file system that has data and exports that data into our federation. And then we have the concept of a cache, and the caches are there to guarantee access to the data in efficient ways, no matter where you are. And so at this point, we have 20 caches, 6 of which are in the research education network backbone. In fact, all 6 of them are in Internet 2, I believe. And actually, I take that back. One of them is in the Great Plains network. I think 5 is in Internet 2, 1 in the Great Plains network, if I remember correctly. And that number 6 is going to blow up to close to 20. So I take this back to 12 to 15 within the next year, because we're adding another 5 in Internet 2, and I think at least 1 in the Florida network. So it's more like 12 at least. Then I want to talk a little bit about what are the principles that govern what we mean by a federation. Given that we want to accomplish this exorbitant number, 4,000, you have to ask yourself, what are the structures that enable you to have a fighting chance in hell to actually get there? And these are some of the core structure. What you mean by federation is ultimately distributed control. Resource owners determine policy of use for what they own. And that principle is simply given by capitalism. If you own something, you control it. That's what capitalism gives you. And we are a capitalist society, voila, owners determine policy of use. It's that simple. And at the same time, resource consumers, in many cases, have a need to determine policy of what they're willing to use. And so those 2 sets of policies are ground rules. And then the system we're building literally has the primary objective of matching these 2 policies against each other. It matches consumers to owners, respecting both sets of policies. That is the basic paradigm within which we build everything we do, or try to at least. That's the aspiration and for what we do. Now, in addition to this, we have a principle that is ultimately driving us, and we think is allowing us to grow, and that is the power of sharing. Any participating institution shall be able to dynamically share any fraction of its resources with any other. And what's important here is that you saw that among our stakeholders are a lot of multi-institutional organization. And so in my mind, science is a team sport. And that is true not just for the large billion-dollar science experiments, it's also true for the million-dollar science experiments. And in many cases, it's even true for individual scientists that they have collaborators, both multidisciplinary and multi-institutional. And when you have multi-institutional science getting done, you want to enable the researchers that collaborate with each other to pool each other's resources and therefore jointly advance each other's science for the collaboration, enable collaboration. And in addition to that, we want to make it possible that institutions can share resources for the common good of all. Given that some of the funders, especially the NSF, put a large value into democratizing access, we want to make it possible that the NSF can, for example, stipulate 20% of the hardware that we're giving you, of the capacity, the usable resource that we're giving you, shall be useful to all of science. And we make that possible by providing the power of sharing. If you want to learn more, but I decided not to go into all of the details of the kinds of science we enable, and instead just leave that to you to explore. I'm going to send the slides afterwards to Lawrence so that I can share it with you. Our annual meeting typically spends half of Monday of the week on the scientists that actually use us as a resource. And so via these links, you can find talks from domain scientists literally all over the map, from economics to physics to astronomy to biology to life sciences more general, applied medicine, anything that is open science basically. And that's the end of what I had wanted to present. My messaging is that OSG continues to advance our mission. I've presented to you what our mission is. In recent years, lots of big data came on. That was sort of the big change 4 years ago. That big change within the last couple of years is a strong focus on democratizing access to DHCC and the Open Science Pool as a strategy for this. And I'll leave it at that. I am open for questions. Thank you very much.
Hey, Frank. So if y'all have a question for him and want to talk about this a little bit, we're happy to entertain that conversation right now.
Hello, Frank. This is Damien from Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you so much for your presentation. Just a few quick questions. Is there a cost to use your services?
Nope, it's all free. So there's a cost in the sense that engagement costs, right? It costs you effort to even engage.
All right.
But beyond this, there's no cost. And it is our goal. I had a slide a few years ago where I expressed our goal that we ideally want to minimize the cost to you, even for engaging with us. And we do this by providing services, all of the weird and peculiar software that is required for you to integrate with us. We operate as services so that our experts operate these services, and that what you have to operate is more standard IT stuff. And the use of OSG costs no money.
Do you need to have a science DMZ?
That's a good one. You need to have open access to the internet, at least the research and education internet. Whether or not you call this a science DMZ, I leave to the networking professionals, which I am not.
Well, I guess that leads to my next question. In your open infrastructure, which includes storage, compute, and devices, any thought on open access or open connect?
Right, and that's, so let me show you one slide just as an example out of the backup. The part where it's difficult is whenever there is locality involved, right? And we believe that the single biggest, most complicated thing to do is actually bringing data onto the infrastructure. And so this is our mental model for how to bring data on the infrastructure, and it addresses some of what you're asking. We work on the premise that your file system may actually be hidden behind an institutional firewall.
Correct.
We then assume that you would allow a placement of hardware that is dual homed and straddles that firewall.
That's a science DMZ.
And that may be your institutional science DMZ, or it may be the open internet. And what exactly the difference is between the open internet and the science DMZ, I let the networking people argue with you rather than me arguing, because I'll get it wrong. And but this kind of, and so what our mental model is that this piece of hardware is owned by you, but operated by possibly us. And so, and we work with the Pacific Research Platform on this, so that if you wanted to have that piece of hardware even operated all the way down to the OS, we can do this. PRP would operate the OS and operate the Kubernetes infrastructure, and then OSG would operate, Path actually would operate the data origin, which is the service that is high level, and you would just define what you're willing to export out of your file system. And you could decide, I'm going to be very, very careful. I'm only going to be read-only exporting via this mount point to this node, a part of my file system. I'm going to put the little pinky into the water with a part of my file system. And then I'm going to gain a familiarity with this. And at some later point, maybe I'll share more of my file system, and maybe eventually I'll make some of my file system writable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're willing to manage the DTN, should I have one?
Exactly. We're willing
All right.
to manage the DTN.
All right, wonderful, thank you. I don't want to take up too much more time. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Frank, I'd like to just make a comment. We started, when I was the CIO at Clemson, we started using OSG, and we didn't have a science DMZ then. And the other comment I'd like to make too was the help that we got at getting researchers up and running came from multiple locations around the country. It was always very timely and incredibly competent. One example, a big genomics project, there were people helping from Indiana, Chicago, Wisconsin, and I think San Diego. And the postdocs and grad students working on the project couldn't say enough nice things about the help they got. So the help is, and this is going back a few years. I assume it's only gotten better, Frank, but it was great.
It's gotten easier. It's gotten a lot easier.
Good.
Jacob,
When you joined first, it was a lot harder still.
They were happy. That's all I'm trying to say.
Jacob, you had a question. I see your hand is raised.
Yes, so I have a question, but first, I want to really appreciate the fact that we're having this discussion. So just an anecdote, I became aware of Open Science Grid when I was a graduate student, first year graduate student, PhD, University of Tennessee, went to the conference, and there was this discussion. That was 2007, and now I am sitting here. So I have a few questions. So I would like for some sort of distinction, whether there is a distinction or a similarity between HTC and HPC. And then that's the first part. The second part is when you say OSG operates the hardware, what do you mean by that? So if I have, if a faculty at my institution has a cluster with 24 nodes and they want to connect to the OSG, so does it imply that you take hold of that and my data center only caters for whatever they do? Yeah.
No, so let me start the first one, and we can add more questions later. But I will lose. I will forget the first question if you give me too many questions in series. Let me start with the first question. I think that HPC is first and foremost a tag that the industry uses, and high performance sounds good when you're trying to sell hardware.
Yep.
And so first and foremost, HPC is in this industry a useful term if you're a vendor. Now, it goes a little bit beyond that in the way that among HPC, in my mind, HPC includes high throughput computing, but it also includes other things. And the distinction between high throughput computing and those other things is any time that what you'd want to do can be done on a single node within a single system. And all you want is many, 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 many of those that can independently execute and have as their only relationship some kind of data flow or workflow. Then you are doing HTC. In contrast, if you need message passing because you need cache coherency, memory coherency, MPI, those kinds of things across many pieces of hardware, and you therefore fundamentally are constrained to hardware that sits on a low latency interconnect network, then you're not doing HTC. And the kind of applications that are massively parallel and need to use low latency interconnects in order to communicate between all of these different pieces of an execution, those cannot run on OSG. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps.
And now I've already forgotten your second question. Can you repeat your second question?
Yeah, so the second question is about operations. So when you say if we hand over, we have a hardware that we are willing to connect to OSG. So you said OSG operates that. So I want to understand what is within operating that. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, and let me go back to share that slide and use it in a slightly different way. Just to, I always find that a picture speaks a thousand words.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I mean by this is the hardware here behind the firewall, you operate. The hardware here, you can also operate. We don't require that we operate this. You can operate, and we can show you how to do this. However, if you decide that I'm having enough work to do just operating the stuff that is inside my firewall, and I'm willing to have one piece of hardware, a server that has limited capabilities, and rather than exposing my entire hardware infrastructure, for example, you mentioned a cluster. Think of this as a cluster instead of a file system. Works the same way. If you have a cluster here, then all you need to do, you don't even need this piece of hardware, because we can operate this piece of hardware in Chicago. And all we need to your cluster, to the cluster head node, that is where users log in, we need one account, a minimum of one account. And that one account needs to be reachable via an automated process. We choose SSH login via what should we call it? A credential. And so we can do all of the submission to your cluster such that you can share your cluster with the entirety out here. We can do all of this via a single account. We can give you even dual authentication or two-factor authentication of sorts, in the sense that we can tell you which host we come from with our submissions, and the IP of that host can be one of the two factors, and you can put on your account an IP table that only our node is allowed to go in. And then the second factor would be the credential, the SSH credential, the SSH key. Am I making sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So that then brings into question the notion of security, because if you have a lot of compute or infrastructure interconnected, and yes, you have all the authentication mechanism, but if one malicious actor were to take hold of, I don't know, any component of the system, they can create havoc. So how do you make sure that all these systems working together have some sort of degree of security?
Yeah. So let me first start by questioning the notion of what security means. And I'm a physicist. As a physicist, we often clarify things by being extreme, picking the extreme case, and therefore clarify what we mean. The only system that is actually secure is one that is still sitting in its box and the box hasn't been opened. That's the only system that is secure.
I agree.
And so the way that we think about it is risk. We manage risk, minimize risk, and mitigate risk. And so the way that we work with Jim Basney. Jim Basney is I'm picking on Jim because he's on the call. We also work with Trusted CI, the institution that is behind it. And in fact, we have something that we call, in fact, I like to call him the cybersecurity czar. And the cybersecurity czar is actually a member of Trusted CI. we outsource our cybersecurity knowledge to Von Walsh's group in a way in Indiana, and so we work with Trusted CI very closely, and we then have them guide us on the overall security principles, and we can share with you a bunch of documents that describe our basic operational security model, and that's about as good as we can do. And we work on the latest transition we've made in this realm. Is we're walking right now towards a paradigm where the credentials that are floating around in cyberspace are restricted to actions they're allowed to do. For example, a credential no longer represents a person. It represents an action that the person is, that this particular piece of software is allowed to do. That way you minimize the risk, because you can no longer steal the identity of a person and use that identity in other means, but you limit what can be stolen is the credential that identifies an activity that this person who owns that credential is allowed to do. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's role-based access credential.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
Jim Basney is at least the co-author, not the brain trust on the software. He knows much more about how this all works under the hood. I'm giving you the management version of the explanation. I actually don't really understand the technology at the level where the Jim does by any stretch of the imagination. So I defer to him for detailed questions on how this all works under the hood in terms of the technology.
Frank, we are at time, but for the audience, I would like to say first, well, Frank, thank you very much. This has been very, very insightful, and I think it's beneficial. You've mentioned a couple people that I think would be of benefit to be on the call, and I was kind of smiling because I've spoken with Lanika and Emily about having a list of invitees, and I think you mentioned Jim, you mentioned Trusted CI, Von Welch. So we plan on having all these members on these calls so we can further, enhance the benefit and explain some of the options that are out here that are available working through the MSCC. So Frank, thank you again. If there's anyone that wants to connect with OSG, please reach out to myself, Lanika, or Emily, and we can, create a direct dialogue for you all. And, after that, the sky's the limit. Are there any other questions? I know we have about 13 minutes. And I wanted to go over a couple things right fast, but are there any other pressing issues concerning OSG that we can address quickly? And I will send an email to you, Frank. If you could share your slides, I'll make sure that I send them out to the group.
Yeah, I'll send it to you right after this call. Basically, as I get off this call, I will send you my slides.
All right, thank you very much. So for the next 12 minutes, I'm going to go over quickly, and I know this is probably not enough time to share all the information that I had for today, but I do think it's important that I get this out because I wanted to make sure that people are aware of all the activities that the MSCC has been doing in the last month. So as everyone is aware, within the last month, I've been hired as the program director for the MSCC. And I spent a week on site in Denver, meeting all the wonderful people at Internet 2. And I don't use that term lightly because they definitely expanded a friendly, welcome hand, not just to me, but to expanding the capability of the MSCC. So I'm gonna go over a couple things that we already put on the calendar, and we are working some further future plans, but they're not in in play just yet. So I'm excited about the future of the MSCC. So we're going to talk about current things that we have already started to schedule on our calendar. We have placeholders because we have to reach out to our member communities, but I think it's important that I let everybody know what's going on the call. So first thing, we have planned 5 out of 7 community webinars. Right now, the title, I'm not sure I feel comfortable with it, and I think we're going to work on the creative side, but it's called A Coffee with Lawrence, right? And the purpose of this webinar is to generate interest in the preceding cybersecurity workshops and CI days that will be held on a variety of campuses. So I've been working with Internet 2's marketing team, and they have been extremely helpful. These series will be pre-recorded and they will be put out on YouTube, I believe, and we'll send the links out. I would encourage everybody, as we send emails, please share with your peers, other members of your institution, or even peers in other organizations, other institutions, because it is important that we get the word out. We also got approval for 5 out of 7 CI days. We are working on the locations. We will be reaching out to various members of the MSCC community and asking them to host these CI days and workshops. So I was getting ready to go into what that would be comprised of, but I don't know that we have enough time. So we'll save that for the next call. The Broadening the Reach workshops, we will have 4 on HBCU campuses and 1 on a TCU campus. I think everybody will be very pleased with the agenda that we're trying to put together for that. And I think by the next call, we'll definitely have a draft agenda that we can go over. We've also been asked to, or been invited to participate in multiple Internet 2 events, which I think is huge because this expands the MSCC's capabilities. Having the support of an organization like Internet 2 only enhances our capability as the MSCC. My vision as the program director is to further expand the capability of the MSCC and serve as a conduit, right, for a variety of opportunities and programs that are available, not just through one organization, but my goal is to have a wealth of channel partners like OSG, like NTIA, that will help us expand our reach. Are there any questions? I know we have about 8 minutes. Are any questions that what I went over, or questions or comments from the group? Okay, I haven't heard anything. Emily, Lanika, have I missed anything for today?
Let me, yeah, Lawrence.
Yes, sir.
Okay, just a quick question. The previous speaker mentioned that we already had MSIs, well, HBCUs in particular, engaged. Can we get a list of those?
Yes. So I was going to share the list of share the list of the institutions with Lawrence. I just haven't gotten around to it yet, and I'll do that. I'll work on that next thing. I just sent him the slides. Yeah. I'll figure out where my spreadsheet is and how much of that spreadsheet I can share, because as you can imagine, Richard, there's the usual thing that I have to make sure that our spreadsheet don't include information that I'm not supposed to share. So there may be a little bit of an issue of figuring out exactly what I can share with Lawrence and what I can't share with Lawrence. So it may take a little bit to sort this out, but because we basically maintain a set of spreadsheets with all institutions, but they may also have PI names on there and stuff like this. So I don't want to share that. So it might take a little bit to figure out how to make that shareable.
Oh, I understand that. And no, I'm just looking to see what our scope is right now, where we are.
Yeah, I will get you. And Richard, I understand that you're heavily involved also with PRP already with Tom DeFanti and so forth. so there is at the all hands meeting, and I gave a talk on how those relate to each other. And so I'll if you're interested in this, I can send you that information as well.
Yeah, matter of fact, you're reading my mind, because as I was watching you, I kept thinking, this is like the National Research Platform.
Yes, exactly. So and we have actually, I have the peculiar. I'm the OSG executive director. I'm a co-PI of PATH. I'm a co-PI of PIP, and I'm the PI of the NRP. And so in my head, these things flow together.
All together.
And so I figured out a way that we can communicate how all of these work together in order to get the job done. And I presented that vision for the first time at the all hands meeting. So I'll get you those slides.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
One thing, we're almost at the top of the hour. I did fail to mention that the workshops that we're putting on are absolutely free. We're going to go into a little more detail next month about the content from the workshop. I am certain that they would be a benefit for everybody who's in attendance. We're going to talk about the structure and you know, what our intent of the workshop is a little more at the next meeting. But I encourage everyone, please share the link to this meeting to anybody, any institution that's a HBCU, TCU, MSI. Membership for the MSCC is free. It's open to all institutions that are MSIs, and we want to drive the membership. We have a lot that we can do to enhance member institutions, and I also want to hear from people. So if you have any ideas or concepts, please reach out to me. And like I said earlier, we can definitely set up a call. Emily, is there anything that I have missed or overlooked?
I think you got it all, Lawrence.
All right, thank you. Well, that's all I have. We're going to give everyone a couple minutes back. We will send the slides out today. I appreciate everyone joining the call, and I look forward to seeing everyone next month. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.